Echoes from Pyongyang.
When we hear our spouse say, "You're beautiful," it makes our day. But in North Korea, when the supreme power looks at another man's wife and says, "What a refined-looking woman," from that moment on, that family begins to crumble. For one pilot who had flown the supreme leader's personal jet for 22 years, that is exactly what happened. To protect his wife, he made a choice beyond imagination. October 2024, 4:40 a.m. At the end of a runway at Pyongyang's Sunan Airport, a man's hands trembled on the control yoke inside the leader's private aircraft. Behind him, his wife and 2 children were curled beneath the rear cabin seats. Beside him, a co-pilot, 20 years his brother in arms, gave a single nod. The moment takeoff clearance came through, he banked not east as the tower had ordered, but west. He had to fly at 160 feet to dodge radar. Behind him, the scramble order was already going out. Roughly an hour later, that aircraft touched down on a Republic of Korea Air Force runway. What emerged from the cabin wasn't armed soldiers. It was a father holding his family, a man who had punched through the most tightly guarded surveillance net in North Korea, aboard the leader's own plane, with his wife and children beside him. How did he stake everything on crossing that sky before dawn? This is the full story.
Please subscribe and like before we start. Your click spreads these stories worldwide, giving hope to 25 million people still living without freedom.
I am Colonel Park Chul-soo of the Korean People's Army Air and Anti-Air Force. I was the personal pilot for the Supreme Leader. Plenty of people fly in North Korea, but the ones trusted to fly his plane, you could count them on one hand. I was one of those fingers. I lived on the 28th floor of a special class apartment in Pyongyang's Yung district, overlooking the Taedong River. A military car picked me up every morning and drove me to Sunan Airport. My wife was a beautiful woman, a former dancer with the Moranbong dance troupe. My daughter was a bright young woman studying at Kim Il-sung University. My son was a 14-year-old boy who loved sports. It was a life anyone would envy. No, a life everyone was supposed to envy. In North Korea, this was the top. There was nowhere higher to go. And yet, on October 18, 2024, at 4:40 a.m., I was racing down the Sunan Airport runway in that very plane with my wife and 2 children hidden aboard. The engines roared. The fuselage kicked free from the earth. Behind us, the control tower lights flashed like something possessed. In those few seconds as the wheels left the ground, I couldn't breathe. Straight ahead was east, the direction the tower had assigned. But I banked west, toward the Yellow Sea. Instead of climbing, I dropped lower. 300 feet, 250, 160. To stay off radar, you had to skim the ground like a blade. Fields and ridgelines slid beneath us in the pre-dawn darkness, close enough to touch. One bad call and we'd be a fireball on a mountainside. 01, you have deviated from your flight path. Return immediately. The tower started screaming. Once, twice, 3 times, each call more desperate than the last. I turned the radio off. There was no going back. Going back meant death. Kim, my co-pilot, sat in the right seat. We'd flown together for nearly 20 years. He was the one who got my family past the security checkpoints. He forged the maintenance test flight paperwork. He arranged for them to be smuggled to the airport in the trunk of a maintenance vehicle before dawn. Without him, none of this would have been possible. He glanced at me and gave a single nod. Let's go. 20 years of brotherhood lived in that nod. From the rear cabin, my son Minho coughed. My wife JONG-UN'S hand shot over his mouth. I heard the muffled sound and my heart dropped through the floor. They'd ridden to the airport crammed inside a vehicle trunk. JONG-UN, my daughter Yoonji, Minho. All 3 were curled up beneath the seats in the back of the plane. If anyone found them, it was over. Not just for me, my wife, my daughter, my son. 3 generations wiped out. And my elderly parents, still in Pyongyang. Every time that thought surfaced, my fingernails dug into my palms around the control yoke. Once the tower reported up the chain, fighter jets would scramble. If a North Korean MiG-29 got airborne, our plane couldn't outrun it. We had to reach the Yellow Sea before that happened. Over open water at treetop altitude, even a MiG would have trouble getting a clean shot. It was a race against time. Kim read the terrain for me. Ridge on the left, 400 feet. Drop right, now. Without his voice cutting through the darkness, that ultra-low altitude flight would have been suicide. How long did we fly? 30 minutes, maybe an hour. Time stopped making sense. When your life is genuinely hanging by a thread, time does strange things. 1 second stretches into an hour. 10 minutes vanish in a blink. Then something glinted through the windshield. The yellow sea. The moment we crossed that line where land ended and water began, Kim said one word: "We're out." I pushed the aircraft down to 160 feet above the waves, skimming the whitecaps. But there was no relief. Kim suddenly shouted, "2 contacts on radar, closing fast." Ice water poured down my spine. North Korean MiGs? South Korean fighters? This single moment would decide whether 5 people lived or died. There was only one thing I could do. Turn the radio back on and switch to the South Korean emergency frequency. My hands were shaking as I dialed in the frequency. From behind me, Yoonji's voice came through. "Father, are we going to be okay?" I wanted to tell her yes. The words wouldn't come. "I'm going to tell you now why I did what I did. Why a man living the most envied life in North Korea stole a plane before dawn, loaded his family aboard, and ran." It started 1 month earlier, with a single sentence I overheard on a flight to Beijing. That one sentence turned my entire life upside down. Every story has a beginning. To understand why I abandoned the highest position in North Korea and fled with nothing, you need to know the life I came from. This may take a while. Please stay with me. I was born in a mountain village on the outskirts of Suncheon, South Pyongyang province. My father was a retired People's Army veteran. My mother worked on a collective farm. We weren't wealthy, but we didn't starve, at least not when I was young. Our house had mud walls and a tile roof. In winter, the heated ondol floor was the warmest place in the world. My mother would stoke the fire at night, and I'd fall asleep pressed against my father's side. Our village sat in a small valley beneath the mountains. In autumn, the hills turned red and gold. When my mother started making kimjong, the big annual batch of kimchi, the whole neighborhood smelled of salted cabbage. Women from every house would gather to trim the heads and gossip. You probably remember that, don't you? The way whole communities used to come together for kimchi season. North Korea was exactly the same. Maybe even warmer, in its way. When you don't have much, you share what you've got. After kimjong, every household would send around a small dish of freshly made kimchi. That briny, crisp taste is still on my tongue. My father was a quiet man. He almost never talked about the war. But sometimes, after a few drinks, he'd murmur to himself, "If this country ever reunifies, things will get better." Some of you may have family members separated during the Korean War. My father lost his older brother during the fighting. The brother had been up in Hamgyong province. Whether he made it south or died in the chaos, my father never found out. That's what division does. The pain is the same, north or south. My mother was the opposite. She never stopped talking. She'd hum songs while cooking, and the neighborhood women were always laughing around her. She made the best potato dumplings, gamja mandu. She'd knead potato starch into dough, stuff it with kimchi and tofu, then steam them. Chewy, savory, perfect. Every holiday, she'd be up before dawn making them. I'd sit beside her, rubbing my sleepy eyes, trying to shape the dough. She'd laugh, "You're not making dumplings, you're making rocks." That laugh decades later, I can still hear it. I was a decent student, especially in math. In middle school, a teacher said, "This kid's smart enough for the Air Force." That remark changed the course of my life. At 16, I entered the Air Force Flight Academy. That's where I first touched the sky. I will never forget the day of my first flight. The trainer rolled down the runway, and the moment the wheels left the ground, the world cracked wide open. A boy from a mountain village who'd only ever looked up at the sky was suddenly looking down. The fields below looked like patches on a quilt. Rivers were thin as thread. So this is how big the world is. Right then, I knew I'd fly for the rest of my life. My grades were strong. Instructors said I had exceptional instincts. After graduation, I was assigned as a fighter pilot, then promoted to transport aircraft captain within a few years. At 34, an unexpected transfer came through, co-pilot of the Supreme Leader's personal aircraft. Goosebumps covered my body. For a pilot, this was the highest honor imaginable. It was also the heaviest burden. One mistake in the air and 3 generations of your family would pay. But the honor outweighed the fear. I'll be honest, back then, I didn't question the system. The party recognized me. The Supreme Leader trusted me. That's what I believed. 2 years as co-pilot, 20 more as captain, 22 years in that cockpit. I was given a special class apartment in Pyongyang's Yung district. A military car took me to Sunan Airport every day. My rations were top-tier white rice, meat, fruit, imported food. Things ordinary citizens couldn't dream of seeing. They were on our dinner table. I met my wife JONG-UN when I was 31. She'd graduated from the Pyongyang University of Arts dance program and was performing with the Moranbong dance troupe. We were introduced through a matchmaker. The moment I saw her, something hit me square in the chest. She was tall, graceful, and her smile, there was a gentleness to it I'd never seen. I'm not much of a talker, but she made me comfortable anyway. After we married, she left the troupe. My position was too sensitive, her public activities had to be restricted. She'd loved that stage, she gave it up because of me. That guilt never left. Yoonji came first. Minho arrived 3 years later. Yoonji took after me, strong in math. When she got into Kim Il-sung University's physics department, we threw a family celebration. Minho took after his mother, tall, athletic, always moving. Our daily routine went like this. Up at 5 a.m. The first thing we did, every single morning, was stand before the portraits of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il hanging in the living room and bow. Every household in North Korea does this. If dust settled on those portraits, you were in trouble. The neighborhood Inmanbanjang, a block warden who monitored residents, would show up for surprise inspections. Jong-un wiped the frames with a clean cloth every morning. It was just life. We didn't even think it was strange. I'd take the military car to Sunan Airport. Every day upon arrival, security inspection by the Boibu State Security. Body search, personal items check, ID verification. Being the Supreme Leader's pilot didn't earn you an exemption. If anything, it made them more thorough. Even on days with no flights scheduled, I had to inspect the aircraft and remain on standby. He could call at any moment. The tension never let up. At night, I'd come home to dinner Jong-un had prepared. The four of us would sit together in the living room overlooking the Taedong River. Yoonji would talk about school. Minho would talk about sports. Jong-un would listen, smiling. From the outside, it looked like a happy family. But here's the thing, we never once said what we actually thought. Every conversation at that table was safe. Praising party policy, expressing gratitude for the Supreme Leader's grace, or just the weather. Everything on television was propaganda. There was no way to know what was happening in the outside world. And you weren't supposed to try. Sometimes, flying, thoughts would creep in. Whenever we landed in Beijing, I'd see people laughing freely, wearing whatever they wanted, snapping photos on their phones. Something stirred in me each time, but I pushed it away. Thinking was dangerous. In North Korea, thinking is the most dangerous act there is. I didn't understand back then. The meat on our table was the price of our freedom. The high floor of that special apartment was just the height of a gilded cage. The man who flew the skies was the one chained tightest to the ground. It took a flight in September 2024 to make me see. Early September 2024. One evening, I came home from Sunan Airport and Jong-un's face was white as chalk. She ran to me at the door without even taking off her shoes. The block warden came by today. The Inmanbanjang, think of a neighborhood monitor who watches residents on behalf of the state. They drop in constantly for portrait inspections, hygiene checks, that sort of thing. Routine. But Jong-un's expression was anything but routine. She pulled me aside, said the Supreme Leader had taken a favorable notice of me, said I might be included in the delegation for the upcoming Beijing visit. At first, it didn't register. Jong-un on a state delegation? She'd left dance over a decade ago. Why now? But the phrase taken a favorable notice kept snagging in my mind. Favorable notice. In North Korea, when the supreme power notices someone's wife favorably, anyone who understands that world knows what it means. I knew. I didn't want to know, but I knew. Days later, the official notice came. Jong-un was assigned to the mid-September Beijing delegation. I'd be on the same plane, naturally, as captain. Refusal was not an option. It was the Supreme Leader's will. In that country, defying his will is choosing death. On the day of the flight, I sat in the cockpit. Jong-un sat in the delegation cabin. Same aircraft, different worlds. Before she boarded, she looked at me. That look, I can't forget it. Her eyes were screaming, I'm scared. Help me. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. And I couldn't do a thing. I just sat in my seat and stared at the instrument panel. After reaching cruising altitude, the cabin intercom picked up voices from the rear. The cockpit was always connected to the cabin audio for emergencies. Usually you'd hear staff chatting. That day, I heard his voice. Whose wife is that woman? An aide answered. The wife of Captain Park Chul-soo, the aircraft pilot. Ah, the captain's wife? What a refined-looking woman. The captain is a lucky man. My hands froze on the yoke. If anyone else had said that, it would be a compliment. Your wife is lovely. But when he said it, it wasn't a compliment. When the supreme power of North Korea takes notice of someone's wife, those who know. Kim, my co-pilot, glanced at me. He said nothing. His eyes said everything. Be careful. In Beijing, during the visit, Jong-Un told me something worse. The Supreme Leader had personally invited her to a performance at Pyongyang Grand Theater after they returned. Her face was ashen. Her lips had gone blue. Her hands trembled. I'm scared. Why is he doing this to me? I had nothing to say. No comfort to offer. Because I was terrified too. I'd flown through turbulence at 40,000 feet without flinching. But that night in a Beijing hotel room, for the first time in my life, I understood what real fear was. After we returned to Pyongyang, I ran into a senior official at a military review. He pulled me aside, voice barely above a whisper. Chul-Soo, let me tell you something. There was a precedent, he said. Years ago, the Supreme Leader had noticed the wife of a high-ranking official. The official was forced to divorce. His wife was taken somewhere. He was sent to the coal mines. The entire family destroyed. The man's crime? His wife was beautiful. Watch yourself. That's all I can say. On the ride home, I sat in the back of the military car and stared at the Taedong River. It looked black that day. 22 years I'd flown for this regime. Given everything. Bowed before those portraits every morning. Expressed gratitude for the Supreme Leader's grace. Done everything asked of me. And the reward? My wife, taken from me. The return on a lifetime of loyalty handing over my wife. A few days later, 2 Boibu agents showed up at the apartment. Comrade Park, we're going to need your cooperation going forward. Cooperation. When state security asks for cooperation in North Korea, it's not a request. It's an order wrapped in a smile. The smile says if you want your family safe, do as you're told. Then the invitation arrived. A revolutionary opera Sea of Blood at the Pyongyang Grand Theater. The Supreme Leader would be attending. My family was to join him. This wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. The point was to bring Jong-Un before him. That night, after the children were asleep, we sat together in the living room. Jong-Un said it. I'd rather die than go to that man. Something shattered inside me. 20 years of loyalty. 20 years of faith. Everything I'd believed about the system collapsed in a single, silent avalanche. My eyes landed on the portraits on the wall. The ones I'd bowed to every morning. For the first time, those faces looked terrifying. I am a man who flies. In the air, I was freer than anyone. Above the clouds, there were no portraits, no block wardens, no state security. But on the ground, I was a bird in a cage. No matter how high I flew, I always came back to the cage. That night, I stood at the window overlooking the Taedong River and stared out at Pyongyang in the dark. Stay here, grow old, watch my wife be taken. Watch my children spend their lives holding their breath under this regime. Or, not here, not like this. If that was an awakening, it wasn't a grand one. It wasn't about freedom or democracy or some noble ideal. It was simpler than that. I wanted to protect my family. That was all. The decision was made, but there was no way out. Most defectors cross the Yalu or Tumen River into China. But I lived in the heart of Pyongyang. I was the Supreme Leader's personal pilot. The surveillance on me was suffocating. I couldn't walk down my own street after work without a state security tail. How would I reach the border? Checkpoints at every junction required ID, and every airport security officer knew my face. Smuggling a family of 4 out of Pyongyang to the Chinese border? Impossible. Then, on a day when every path seemed blocked, I spoke with Kim. My co-pilot, 20 years in the same cockpit. We could read each other's thoughts from a glance. That day, in a quiet corner of the hangar, we lit cigarettes. I spoke first. Things are bad. Kim studied me for a long moment. I already heard. The Supreme Leader noticed your wife. Rumors travel fast inside the military. I was the last to know. Kim dropped his voice to a murmur. We have an airplane. At first, it sounded insane. Steal the leader's personal jet and fly south? But the more Kim talked, the more it made sense. You're the captain. I'm the co-pilot. We walk into Sunan Airport every day. We have unrestricted access to that aircraft. Maintenance test flights are scheduled 2 or 3 times a month. If we take off before dawn, nobody questions the first few minutes. No one else on Earth can pull this off. He was right. Only 2 pilots and a handful of mechanics could get near that plane. The problem was what happened after liftoff. Once the tower flagged the deviation, MiGs would scramble. A MiG-29 maxes out at Mach 2.3. Our jet couldn't do half that. In a straight race, we were dead. There was only one option. Ultra-low altitude flight. Immediately after takeoff, drop to under 300 feet. Hug the terrain, hills, valleys, ridgelines to stay below radar coverage. Flying that low is madness. One miscalculation and you're a crater in a mountainside. But I'd been flying this airspace for over 20 years. I could draw the west coast terrain of North Korea with my eyes closed. Kim and I ran simulations in our heads every night. At the airport, we communicated with glances. Real conversations happened at home, written on paper. The paper was burned immediately. Evidence meant death. We mapped the route. Takeoff from Sunan. Immediate westward bank. Ultra-low altitude across the mountains of South Pyongyang province. Reach the west coast. Drop to 160 feet over the sea. Fly south. Cross the northern limit line. Declare defection on the South Korean emergency frequency. Total flight time 60 to 90 minutes. Fuel wouldn't be a problem. The leader's plane carried tanks built for long-haul trips. The hardest piece was getting my family on board. No civilians enter Sunan Airport. Kim found a way. On test flight mornings, maintenance vehicles shuttled between the hangar and the runway. Hide people in the trunk of one of those vehicles, and you could bypass the security gate. Kim had arranged things with the driver, Sergeant Ree. What he promised the man, I don't know exactly. Probably something worth a life. Meanwhile, the pressure kept building. The opera date was approaching. The Boebu agents came again. The Supreme Leader is taking a special interest in your wife, Comrade Park. That's a good thing, isn't it? A good thing. When I closed the front door behind them, Jong-un dropped a dish in the kitchen. The crash startled Minho, who came running. Yoonji held her mother. 10 days until the test flight. Just hold on for 10 days. October 15th. The test flight schedule was confirmed. The 18th. 5:00 a.m. That night, I told my wife. In 3 days, we leave. By plane. South. Jong-un stared at me for a long time without speaking. Then she nodded. No tears. She was always the strong one. A woman who'd performed before 1,000 people on the Moranbong stage. She didn't break, not even now. We couldn't bring luggage, only what fit in the pockets of a flight suit. My flight log notebook, my airport access badge, $2,000, 2 gold rings, 1 family photograph. Jong-un tucked passport photos of the children into her wallet. Yoonji took a small cloth pouch her grandmother had sewn. Everything in that 28th floor apartment, the furniture. The dishes, the clothes, the blankets, the dance costumes Jong-un had brought when we married, all of it, left behind. 20 years of a life, compressed into a flight suit pocket. Can you imagine what that feels like? The night before we left, I visited my parents. I made it look routine, just a son dropping by. My mother made potato dumplings. She always did when I came. My father was watching television. He turned his head when I walked in. You're here, that was all he said. A lifetime of few words. I ate the dumplings slowly, studying my mother's face. The wrinkles had deepened. Her hair had gone mostly gray. Her knuckles were swollen hands that had worked a collective farm for a lifetime. Those hands were folding dumplings for me. Words climbed to the back of my throat. Mother, I'm leaving the day after tomorrow. Somewhere far away. I may never come back. These dumplings may be the last ones. Forgive me. Not a single word came out. If I spoke, she'd fall apart. If anything leaked, everyone was finished. So I just chewed slowly, pressing the taste into my memory. Take care, I said at the door. As I stepped out, my mother called after me, bring Yoonji next time. Next time. Those words drove into my chest like a nail. There might not be a next time. I walked down the alley and, for the first time, I cried. Silently, alone in the dark. The alley had no streetlights. I stood there and wept, then wiped my face and went home. October 18th. My eyes opened at 3:00 a.m. No, they never closed. I hadn't slept. Jong-un was awake too. In the darkness, her eyes caught a faint light. We lay there looking at each other without a word. Then I spoke first. Get up. I woke the children. Yoonji rose immediately. She was 22, she understood. I'd told her everything the night before. Minho was the problem. How do you explain this to a 14-year-old? Your father has a special flight today. You're all coming. You cannot tell anyone. Minho looked at me through half-closed, sleepy eyes. Okay, that boy never questioned his father. He just followed. I was grateful for that. And ashamed. He had no idea where we were going. He was following me on blind trust. 4 o'clock. We left the apartment. No elevator, too much noise. 28 floors down the emergency stairwell. Jong-un carried her shoes and went barefoot. Yoonji held Minho's hand behind her. Every footstep echoed like a drumbeat. Around the 3rd floor, a door opened somewhere above us. All 4 of us pressed flat against the wall and froze. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure someone could hear it. Just a neighbor heading to the bathroom. We kept moving. Behind the apartment building, a maintenance vehicle was waiting in the alley. Sergeant Ri. The trunk was open. It was small. 2 adults and 2 children had to fit inside. Jong-un climbed in first. Yunji followed. Minho last. As I lowered the trunk lid, Minho's frightened eyes were the last thing I saw. I wanted to say it's okay. My mouth wouldn't move. I closed the lid. The thud echoed through the empty alley. I got in the passenger seat. Ri started the car and drove toward Sunan Airport without a word. At 4:20 a.m., Pyongyang's streets were deserted. Half the streetlights were out. An occasional soldier stood guard. 1 checkpoint. Ri flashed the transit pass. Waved through. I prayed for silence from the trunk. 4:30 a.m. Sunan Airport security gate. Ri held out the maintenance vehicle pass. The guard swept a flashlight through the cab. Saw me in the passenger seat. Ah, Captain Park. He knew my face, saw it every day. Test flight? Yes. The gate opened. No trunk inspection. Kim had taken care of that in advance. Kim was already at the hangar, dressed in his flight suit, clipboard in hand. Everything looked like a standard test flight prep. 2 mechanics were running external checks on the aircraft. They knew nothing, just doing their jobs. The moment the mechanics stepped inside the hangar, Kim gave the signal. I opened the trunk. Jong-un came out first, her body so stiff she could barely stand. Yunji and Minho followed. We moved them quickly through the rear boarding door and hid them beneath the back cabin seats. Stay hidden. No matter what you hear, don't move. Jong-un nodded. Yunji was holding Minho tight. 4:40 a.m. Kim and I took our seats in the cockpit. Pre-flight checklist. Instruments check. Fuel check. Hydraulics check. Comms check. One by one, down the list. My hands shook, but this was a ritual I'd performed for over 20 years. Muscle memory took over. Kim spoke quietly. This is it. I knew. Sunan Tower, this is Special 01. Requesting takeoff clearance for maintenance test flight. A few seconds of silence from the tower. In that gap, Minho coughed. My heart stopped. Jong-un's hand over his mouth. The tower wouldn't have heard. I told myself they didn't hear. 01, takeoff clearance granted. Climb to 3000, heading 230. Throttles full forward. The engines screamed. The aircraft hurtled down the runway. 100 knots. 120. 140. I pulled back on the yoke. The wheels lifted. We climbed, but I didn't follow the assigned heading. I banked west and pushed the nose down. 01, you have deviated. Return immediately. The tower was screaming. This time I didn't turn the radio off. I listened deliberately. I needed to time how long before the report went up the chain. Minimum 10 to 15 minutes before a scramble order. We had to reach the water before then. We tore across the South Pyongyang flatlands at rooftop height. Ridgelines slipped past close enough to scrape the belly. Once, a high-voltage transmission tower materialized dead ahead. I yanked the nose up, cleared it, and dove again. Kim called out terrain. Ridge left, 400 feet. Drop right. Now. Without 20 years of shared instinct, we'd have been wreckage on a hillside. 15 minutes in, the Yellow Sea appeared. The instant land fell away, I dropped to 160 feet above the surface. Wave crests blurred beneath us. Behind us, MiGs were certainly airborne by now. Every second was a gamble. 20 minutes. 30. South across the open water. Kim watched the navigation display. Approaching the NLL. 5 minutes. The northern limit line, the maritime border. Cross it, and we'd be in South Korean waters. 5 minutes. 300 seconds. Then Kim shouted. 2 contacts on radar. Closing. My spine turned to ice. But the bearing was wrong for North Korean fighters. These were coming from the south. If they were coming from the south, then I switched the radio to the South Korean emergency frequency. This is a North Korean state aircraft. We are defecting with family aboard. Do not fire. 3 seconds. 5, 7. Each one lasted a lifetime. Unidentified aircraft, this is the Republic of Korea Air Force. We acknowledge your intention to defect. Kim slammed his fist against his knee. Tears ran down my face, hands still locked on the yoke. 2 F-15Ks slid into formation on either side. The Taeguk roundel, South Korea's emblem, blazed in the morning sun. From behind me, Jong-un's voice. Did we make it? We made it. We're across Sunan Airport to here 1 hour and 15 minutes. But the real journey to reach this point had taken 22 years. The airbase runway came into view, and I began climbing under South Korean control. Rising from 160 feet over the Yellow Sea to 3,000, then 6,000 feet, the world suddenly flooded with light. The sun was coming up. The entire flight from the north had been darkness. Now the southern sky was burning orange. Jong-un was quietly sobbing behind me. Even during the landing sequence, my hands wouldn't stop trembling. In 22 years, I'd made hundreds of landings. None had ever felt like this. No room for error, my entire family was on board. The wheels kissed the runway with a jolt. I engaged thrust reversers, and the airframe groaned as it bled speed. When the aircraft finally stopped at the end of the runway, Kim let out a long breath. "We're down." All I could manage was a nod. Words had left me. Outside was pure tension. Military vehicles ringed the runway. Fully armed soldiers had their weapons trained on our aircraft. Of course they did. A North Korean state jet had just appeared out of nowhere and landed on their base. I opened the door slowly, raised both hands high, and stepped out first. "I am requesting asylum in the Republic of Korea. My family is with me. We are unarmed." The asphalt was cold under my feet. October morning air hit my face, and it felt like the best thing I'd ever known. The same wind that blew in the north, but here, no one was watching me. That was the difference. Soldiers approached. An officer asked in a steady voice, "How many aboard?" 5. Myself, my co-pilot, my wife, my daughter, and my son. Jong-un came down the stairs holding the children's hands. Her legs were shaking so badly Yoonji had to steady her. Minho was fighting back tears, jaw clenched, biting his lip. The sight of that 14-year-old boy holding himself together by sheer will, I broke again. I was the father who'd put him through this. But the soldiers who surrounded us weren't rough. They brought blankets. They offered warm water. In North Korea, soldiers don't bring you blankets. Soldiers are the ones who take you away, not the ones who take care of you. Jong-un sank to the ground clutching that blanket and wept openly. A woman who'd stood before 1,000 people on the Moranbong stage without flinching, undone by a single blanket. But here's the truth. There was no joy. Relief, yes. Beneath it, though, guilt. My parents. Still in Pyongyang, both over 70. Once my defection became known, the consequences for them, maybe not a political prison camp, but exile from Pyongyang, was certain. My mother would lose her place on the farm she'd worked her entire life. The neighbors would point and whisper, "Their son, a traitor." Kim was the same. He'd left his elderly mother behind too. He sat on the tarmac wrapped in a blanket, staring at the ground. Our eyes met. Neither of us could speak. Not because there was nothing to say, because opening our mouths would have broken us. A military vehicle came to take us away. Before I climbed in, I looked back. The aircraft stood on the runway, gleaming in the morning light. I'd flown that plane for 22 years. There were times I'd felt a surge of pride carrying the supreme leader through the sky. But today, that plane had carried my family. And it would never fly north again. Neither would I. In the car, Minho pressed his face to the window. Then, quietly, "Father, there are so many lights here." That single sentence hit harder than anything. The first thing a 14-year-old noticed: lights. Even Pyongyang goes dark at night. Power outages were constant, even in our special class apartment. Street lights rarely all worked at the same time. But here, in the early morning, everything was bright. The roads were clean. Street lights stretched in unbroken rows. Cars moved freely. People walked wherever they wanted. We're alive. That was real. But the other side of my chest was hollow. The smell of my mother's potato dumplings lingered at the edge of every breath. "Bring Yoonji next time." That voice wouldn't leave me. I knew I could never go back, but I kept looking over my shoulder anyway. Maybe that's what arrival really is. You set foot on new ground, and what meets you first isn't joy, it's the weight of everything you left behind. The military vehicle drove for about an hour and stopped in front of a concrete building with small, high windows. I later learned it was the Joint Interrogation Center, the facility where people who come from the north are debriefed. The moment we stepped inside, they separated us. My wife and children went one direction. Kim went another. I went alone. Jong-un grabbed my sleeve. "Can't we stay together?" The official shook his head. Yoonji took her mother's hand and led her away. Minho looked back at me, eyes wide with fear. I nodded. It's okay, but it wasn't. In North Korea, when your family is taken to separate rooms, you might never see them again. My rational mind knew this was South Korea. My body didn't. 22 years of conditioned terror doesn't switch off because you crossed a line on a map. The interrogation room was cleaner than I expected. White fluorescent lights. A cup of water on the desk. The moment I sat down, every ounce of strength drained from my body. I'd been running on adrenaline since before dawn. People filed in. 2 in suits. 1 in uniform. Later I learned they were from the National Intelligence Service and Military Intelligence. One started a recorder. Another opened a file. Your full legal name, rank and unit. When did you begin piloting the state aircraft? I answered each one. At first, the questions were basic. Then the atmosphere shifted. How can you prove this isn't a staged defection? A chill ran through me. I understood the suspicion. The Supreme Leader's personal pilot defects with his entire family. This was extraordinary. They had to rule out espionage. But hearing those words after risking 5 lives to get here, unless you've been through it, you can't know how that cuts. I reached into the inner pocket of my flight suit. Flight log notebook. Sunan Airport access badge. Aircraft maintenance checklists. 1 family photograph. The notebook was packed with entries spanning over 20 years. Dates, departures, destinations, flight hours, weather conditions. Every trip the Supreme Leader had taken was documented. This was material that could never leave North Korea. No spy would carry it out. The investigator turned the pages one by one. Something changed behind his eyes. The officer in uniform made a phone call. More people entered the room. Your September 2024 entry shows a Beijing delegation flight. Who was on board? Provide the aircraft type designation and specifications. Describe the security protocols for the state aircraft hangar at Sunan. I had nothing to hide. I wanted to empty everything out. State the specific and direct reason for your defection. I paused. Talking about my wife to strangers wasn't easy. But it had to be done. Because of my wife. My throat closed. I took a sip of water. The investigator waited. He noticed her. The Supreme Leader. The room went silent. Only the hum of the recorder. A subtle tightening crossed the investigator's face. That silence, anyone who understood North Korea would have read it instantly. The session ran over 8 hours. They asked the same questions 3, 4 times, rephrased each time, cross-referencing my answers for consistency. Exhaustion. Drowsiness. I missed my family. Were JONG-UN and the children all right? Had they eaten? I wanted to ask but couldn't. That evening, a boxed meal arrived. White rice, bulgogi, kimchi, doenjang soup. In North Korea, I could eat white rice. I was privileged. But picking up that meal box, tears came and I didn't understand why. In North Korea, interrogation doesn't come with food. It comes with fists. I'd never been on the receiving end myself, but a colleague once spent time with the Boibu. When he came back, he didn't speak for a month. His eyes were dead. No one asked what happened. Asking was dangerous too. Here, it was different. The questioning was rigorous, but no one struck me. No threats. No one dangled my family's safety as leverage. They gave me food, water, bathroom breaks. Basic decency, but nothing about it felt basic to me. After the meal, the investigator said one thing. Your family is safe. Don't worry. I froze with the spoon in my hand. My head dropped. I cried for a long time. No shame in it. 2 days of everything I'd held inside broke loose at once. From Pyongyang to Sunan to that pre-dawn sky to this room, I hadn't shed a single tear. There'd been no room for it. But those 5 words, your family is safe, cracked the dam. The debriefing continued for several more days. They verified every line of the flight log. They confirmed the aircraft specifications. They validated Sunan Airport's security architecture. In the middle of the notebook, they found a page dated early September 2024. The Beijing delegation flight. Next to the flight time, weather, and passenger count, I'd scrawled a small note: JONG-UN, delegation included. My hand had been shaking when I wrote those 3 syllables. The investigator studied that entry closely, then gave a single nod. As if something had clicked into place. That first day was the longest and hardest. Under those fluorescent lights, I laid bare 20 years of my life. Each page of that notebook was a piece of me, and watching strangers read through it. Word by word was a strange, exposed feeling. But afterward, after everything was out, my chest felt a fraction lighter. For 20 years, I'd never been able to speak freely to anyone. This was the first time. The debriefing took nearly 2 months. I'd crossed in October. We left the protection facility in December 2024. From there, our family went to Hanwon, in Ansung, Gyeonggi Province, a resettlement center where North Korean defectors learn to adjust to life in the south. The first strange thing I noticed at Hanwon: the doors weren't locked. Not the room doors, not the building exits. In North Korea, doors are always locked from the outside. Here, the locks were on the inside. I could leave whenever I wanted. Do you understand the difference? Freedom wasn't some grand abstraction. It was a door I could open and close myself. Classes started. They called it Korean, but the same language had split into different words. What North Koreans call wisangsel was wajongshul here. A salrimjip was an apateu. At first, I could only follow half of what the instructor said. The biggest shock came during a civics lesson. The teacher said, in the Republic of Korea, you're allowed to criticize the president. If you disagree with government policy, you can say so. The room went dead silent. 20 defectors sat frozen. We all thought it was a joke. In North Korea, criticizing the supreme leader means 3 generations in a prison camp. Even mispronouncing his name can end you. Kim nudged me. His eyes said, "Is this real?" I raised my hand. "Is that actually allowed? You don't get arrested?" The teacher smiled. "Of course. That's democracy." In that moment, 22 years of loyalty, everything I defended, everything I believed in crystallized into something I could finally see clearly. Bowing before portraits every morning. Never uttering a word of dissent. Living in constant fear. None of it had been normal. My head had known that since the flight. But in that classroom, my heart caught up. On weekends, we were allowed to go out. The first time we went to a supermarket with the family. It was another earthquake. Shelves overflowed. One entire aisle was nothing but snacks. Dozens of ramen varieties. More drinks than I could count. Minho stopped dead in front of the snack section, mouth hanging open. Yoongi said, "Pick something, little brother." Minho turned to me. "Father, can I really choose?" "Yes. Get whatever you want." He grabbed a package and clutched it to his chest. Choco pie. In North Korea, choco pies are practically currency. They sell for steep prices in the Jongmadang, the informal markets. Ordinary citizens rarely taste one. Even our family, with all our privileges, didn't eat them freely. Watching Minho hug that choco pie, Jong-un gripped my arm. She was crying. So was I. A married couple weeping side by side in the middle of a supermarket. It must have looked absurd. But we couldn't help it. A child choosing a snack had become a miracle. It was heartbreaking and beautiful at the same time. After completing the Hanawan program, in March 2025, our family settled in a small city in Gyeonggi province. A 2-room apartment provided by the government. It had an elevator, internet access, and for the first time smartphones. Jong-un learned how to take photos. And started snapping pictures of the children every day. In North Korea, taking photos casually could get you accused of espionage. Photographing streets or buildings was especially dangerous. Here, she could point her camera anywhere she wanted. For Jong-un, that was freedom. I needed a job. I'd been a state aircraft captain in North Korea. But those credentials meant nothing here. Different country, different licenses, different systems. At first, it stung. Over 20 years of flying, and here I was starting from zero. But I found a position at a small trading company. All those years of delegation flights to China meant I spoke decent Mandarin. And that proved useful. The salary was modest, but every one of it was earned honestly. Without bowing to anyone, Yoongi enrolled in college through a special admissions track for defectors. She chose computer science. "Father, this is what I want to do. In North Korea, I want is a luxury. The party decides what you do, you don't choose." Minho settled into high school. He got teased at first for his accent. But once he joined the basketball team, friends came naturally. A ball doesn't care how you talk. Kim settled in the same city. He got his driver's license and started doing deliveries. On weekends, we share a bottle of soju. We rarely talk about flying. How many kinds of fried chicken are there in this country? It's insane, he'll say, and laugh. That laugh means the world to me. Without this man, I wouldn't be here. But nighttime was hard. Days were manageable, I stayed busy. At night, when I closed my eyes, the cockpit came back. Sunan Airport runway. Control tower lights flashing. "You have deviated. Return immediately." I'd wake drenched in sweat at 3 a.m. Jong-un would be awake too. Her recurring dream standing on the Moranbong stage and in the audience. He is smiling at her. Neither of us has fully escaped those shadows. One thing is different, though. When we wake, we're on free soil. Our family is beside us. The door locks from the inside. And in the morning, no one has to stand before a portrait. We started going to church. Someone we met at Hanawan introduced us. It felt awkward at first. Religion is banned in North Korea. But the congregation was warm in a way I hadn't expected. No questions. Just meals prepared for us, fruit for the children, cooking lessons for Jong-un. Every Sunday, I pray. For my parents' health in the north. That our leaving didn't bring punishment down on them. Thinking about my parents still takes the air out of my lungs. The potato dumplings my mother made the night before we left, that taste keeps drifting back. Bring Yoongi next time. Those words circle in my head and won't stop. There was no next time. I think next time might be the cruelest phrase in any language. I let her believe there would be one. And then I made sure there wouldn't be. I don't regret it. In the small hours, when I'm staring at the ceiling and the guilt over my parents presses down like a stone on my chest even then. Because Jong-un is beside me. Down the hall, Minho is sleeping. In the next room, Yunji has fallen asleep over her books again. These children are studying what they choose, eating what they want, going where they please, under an open sky. There is pain, but there is no regret. For 22 years, I flew. I piloted the Supreme Leader's personal jet, through the highest skies in the country. But I didn't know what freedom was. I soared above the clouds and never left my cage. Now I'm an ordinary employee at a small company. Instead of a cockpit, I sit at a desk. I don't fly anymore, and I have never been more free. If the day comes when Korea is reunified, the first thing I'll do is go to Pyongyang. Walk along the Taedong River. Find my parents' graves, if graves are there to find. Set a bowl of potato dumplings before my mother. Until that day, I'll live my life here as best I can. You take freedom for granted, don't you? Criticizing the president, choosing a snack at the store, going wherever you please. This isn't a given. 25 million people north of the border still dream of these things. The sky I flew through, it should be their sky too. I've told my story as plainly as I know how. Thank you for staying with me to the end.